All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're doing our preview and prediction for the Purdue Boilermakers. Before we get started, we'd like to send our condolences to the friends, family, and the entire Oregon Duck community after the tragic passing of tight end Spencer Webb, who lost his life earlier this week. He was most famously known for coming down for a great grab in that big game a couple years ago against Auburn. You have any thoughts you'd like to add, Nick?
Yeah, just a great player, a lot of fun to watch on the field, good tight end, and that game against Auburn really showed out and had that incredible grab. It's tragic to lose a young player like this who was really talented and was a great part of the program out in Oregon.
Getting things started here with this coaching staff. Jeff Braun back for his sixth year, 28. Because they've really knocked off some good opponents, Nick. I think 3 top 5 opponents. So to have a below 500 record, that doesn't really tell the full story considering who they've really beat. It's kind of odd, though, that they can show up against these top-notch opponents, but kind of the lesser ones they struggle with. Brian Braun, he's been coaching since 2016. Been at co-OC with his dad since then. Ron English and Mark Hagan, the defensive play callers. Looking at this offense, 29 points per game last season. That isn't exactly great considering they scored more than that on both Michigan State and Iowa, 2 of those top 5 teams we just talked about. Well, they also have this explosive scheme that starts with Aiden O'Connell at quarterback. For the most part, the past few years, really, they've been using a 2 QB system. Jack Plummer's now off to Cal, though. He should do great there. So O'Connell ran away with the job. 72% completion rate, 28 touchdowns, 3,700 yards. And then, he's 3rd and 4th in school history with 536 yards and then 534 respectively, games that happened this past season. What are your thoughts on Aiden O'Connell? He just seems to be so good in this air raid system that's kind of tailored around good quarterbacks, but when you're really good, you really showcase your skills.
Purdue are such an interesting program. They really are the playoff era's spoiler team. They've upset some serious teams that were in playoff contention in the Big Ten. I think Ohio State's one that a lot of people remember in that game where Purdue just absolutely blew the brakes off them. It was a shocking upset. And Aiden O'Connell is such a talented quarterback. I really like what he can do. He fits perfectly in this system. It's really tailor-made for him. He really excels in this system. I love the completion percentage. 72% is insane for a Big Ten quarterback. I love that number. 3,700 yards last year, 28 touchdowns, only 11 interceptions. Looked good across the board. I think he's a superstar quarterback. I love the way he fits in this program. The offense is built for him. I think he is a perfect fit for it. I think they can continue to kind of grow with him, and I think he hasn't even met his ceiling yet.
And looking at his group of pass catchers, it's a pretty loaded receiving core, I believe. They lose Milton Wright, ruled academically, and that was a big-time loss. It sucks because I really wanted to see him this year. They're now down their top 3 pass catchers from a year ago. David Bell departs, but they added 2 guys from Iowa, Charlie Jones and Tyron Tracy. And it kind of shows you where the state of that Iowa passing attack is when 2 guys leave cross-conference to go to a team and they got shredded by it. Remember, O'Connell put on a clinic versus them. David Bell absolutely schooled Iowa that day. They want to be a part of this passing attack. I think this is a really good fit for them. They also got TJ Sheffield, caught 36 balls for 325 yards. Brock Thompson, he's always been that deep threat for them. 30 grabs for 457 last year with 4 touchdowns. Half of those numbers came in the bowl game, though, against Tennessee, 217 yards and 2 scores. He caught a pass in all 12 games a year ago, though. And Mershawn Rice, he wasn't used the way I anticipated him to be used last year, 6'2", 205, only 6 receptions. But I think that this is a guy they're going to look to get on the field more. I think the biggest returning, Nick, Payne Durham at tight end, 45 receptions, 467 yards, 6 touchdowns, 6'5", 255, a versatile tight end. I really like this wide receiver group despite some pretty significant losses.
I like what Durham can do at tight end. I think he's a solid fit there, really, really decent tight end. I love the size. Bit of a dynamic player. I love what he can do there. They lose a lot of production, like we said. Losing Milton Wright is definitely a sad loss because he is a talented player, just couldn't get it right off the field. But I look at the guys that do have. I think Brock Thompson's a super talented player. 15.2 yards per catch last year, 4 touchdowns, not a bad showing from him. And I like to see Rice get involved a little bit more. Rice just didn't get the touches he did last year, but he did have 11.5 yards per catch and a touchdown to boot. I think he's a solid player. I like to see him be involved early on.
Now, looking at the running game, they don't run the ball a whole lot in this air raid. Less than 85 yards per game the last 2 years, though, is just kind of poor. Its yards per carry numbers are not good. 2.7 last year, wasn't much better the year prior. 30 carries for 85 yards per game last year. That's just not good. Understand the nature of this offense, but when you look at the game log, it's just poor. Only 3 games of 100-plus last year. UConn and Indiana were 2 of them. So they really didn't do anything at all against anybody running the game. King Duro, he's back, 530 yards. Had a nice change of pace with him and Xander Horvath. He's now gone. Kobe Lewis, though, he arrives from Central Michigan. I don't really have many expectations for this running game because that's just not something to do. You see it with Mike Leach as well at Mississippi State, and this time at Washington State with an air raid attack does not open the door for great success on the ground, which is kind of crazy considering how much they spread it out, Nick.
Yeah, right. Duru is a solid back. I do like what he can do, but I don't expect to see him get a whole lot of touches this year just because of the style of the offense. And there's nothing to say about Duru in terms of knock on him. It's just how the offense is. I like to see him maybe get a few more carries. The average last year was 3.9. Maybe he can raise that a little bit. Still solid, though. 2 touchdowns on the ground for Duru last year. Maybe he gets a few more this year. Try to get him involved because he's a dynamic back.
They don't even use the running backs that much in this air raid passing attack. Mike Leach, his running backs have like 200-plus receptions combined every year. Last year, the 2 starters, only 37. So they don't use these backs a whole lot. But I do want to see that yards per carry number improve. I'm not so worried about the yards per game because that's obviously going to be low. But you give your offense some help here because 29 points per game last year. The lack of not having balance, that certainly didn't, solve anything for them. Get back 3 starters on the O-line, added 2 transfers, Siona Fianu at left guard, Daniel Johnson at right tackle. And I think Eric Miller is going to lock down left tackle, 6'7", 305. He's the only true senior here. So there's plenty of room for growth from a unit that was not that good a season ago. Which, again, Nick, when you have the air raid offense, you would like to see your quarterback stay up more because when you're hitting the ground that much in this offense where you're getting the ball out in a hurry, that's a problem.
I like Miller. I think he's a solid leader. I think he fits well in that. And, it's a good to have a leadership role on that offensive line. But I get a little concerned. I don't think the center depth is there. Hartwig's a solid center, but if he goes down with injury, there isn't really no depth. I don't know who's going to step up and fill that hole. And in general, it's just a very inexperienced offensive line. Of course, it's nice that some of these guys are returning. They got some good experience. But across the board, I just get a little concerned. I just don't see the experience there. I look at the right side of the field as well. Right guard, right tackle are both very inexperienced guys who don't have a whole lot of reps.
Looking at this defense, I really thought this was a good unit last year, Nick, but not a lot of people appreciated or even knew that it was good. They get back 8 starters. All 3 losses are pretty key, though. Only allowed 22.4 points per game. Allowed over 400 yards only 3 times. One against Michigan State where they were trailing from behind, so obviously they were giving up some yards. I thought they played very well that day. The other 2 were against Ohio State and Tennessee where they gave up, I think, 650 plus. Despite performing well, they struggled when they were tasked with stopping more talented attacks. They got burned. Those 3 games were evident. Really just 2 because I think Michigan State, they held up very well. This pass rush, they only had 5 sacks in 6 games in 2020. Stepped that up immensely. 26 sacks in 13 games this past fall. That's 2 per game. George Kalafitz, of course, he's gone, so that's obviously a significant loss. Kydran Jenkins, 35 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 5 sacks in his debut season. I'm looking to see him fill that role that Carlos Fitz departs from. Jack Sullivan, he's another vet that will start opposite side of him. I like this interior D-line. Lawrence Johnson, 6'1", 310, a little bit bigger, 34 tackles, a little bit bigger than Branson Dean, that is, at 6'2", 275. 10 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks last year. I think it's a very solid duo of defensive tackles here. But overall, kind of iffy on this defensive line because I do think that depth in overall production is going to be a little bit less than it was last year.
I like Dean. The 10 tackles for loss is an impressive stat for him. I think that's a solid number to see out of him. I think Jenkins as well. 5 sacks last year. I expect him to take a step forward, get some more sacks, maybe hit that double-digit total potentially, considering the potential he has shown last season, like his 8 tackles for loss as well. Solid numbers from him. It is tough to replace that sort of production coming from a guy like George Karlaftis, who was an early draft pick. But I think they have decent depth. I think Lawrence Johnson's another guy who's a solid player, has some serious experience already, 4.5 tackles for loss, plus a sack last year. I expect this defensive line to be kind of where they were last year, which was a solid defensive line, very respectable in the Big Ten. And I think they'll be able to replace the absence of Karlaftis by stepping up from multiple different players.
I think they did a pretty good job last year progressing because I was very concerned heading into the year with how poor they played in 2020. So they impressed there. And for the most part, obviously they lose a high-end draft pick. But outside of that, they don't lose too many guys up here. So I am kind of iffy. But at the same time, I do expect them to get better. A guy I expected to have a great year last year, Jalen Alexander, a linebacker. He did, but he's now gone. I like this linebacking core, Nick. Plenty of veterans. Kieran Douglas, he's a 4th-year senior with 67 stops last season. Jalen Graham, he also had 67 tackles, 7 pass breakups, 2 picks, so he was obviously very active in coverage. And then Clyde Washington and O.C. Brothers, guys have been around a long time. They're going to slot into the lineup. I like this linebacking core. And then you look at the secondary. It was solid. 34th ranked pass defense. Gave up nearly 400 yards and 5 TDs each to Ohio State and Tennessee, though. So they struggled against these fiery passing attacks, but for the most part, they really held up well. They lose Dedrick Mackey at corner. Marvin Gant.
I really like the secondary top to bottom. I think Cam Allen's a super solid player. 4 interceptions last year, 3 pass breakups, and a fumble recovery. He has a lot of potential to step up and be a leader on this team. 65 total tackles from him as well. Not bad at all. Jamari Brown, another guy I like a lot. I think he can step up 6 pass breakups and 2 forced fumbles. He's a dynamic player. I like to see him move around a little bit this year. and be used in the defense in a couple different ways. I think the secondary is strong. I like how they are, and I think the way that they return these guys, Allen and Brown, I think they're set for the season.
They also picked up 2 transfers, T. Denson and then Reese Taylor. All these guys, he comes over from Indiana. He was a really good corner at Indiana, Taylor was, opposite side of Tijuan Mullen. So this secondary, they do lose 2 starters, but I do think that they're going to continue to progress because everybody, they're seniors. All these new starters have one thing in common too, and that's that they're veterans. That's on the entire defense. You see that, where these guys are going to step up. They've been around a long time, and they're going to be expected to play good football. So I think that this defense, obviously they struggled against the more talented teams last year, but I expect them to continue to get better, and I think 22 points per game, it's a hard number for a school like this to continue to replicate year after year, but I think they can certainly improve on that number, Nick.
Yeah, this defense is strong. I really like how they've done with the coaching and kind of built this defense up. Seems like Purdue has been producing on defense for the last couple of seasons. 22.4 points per game might be tough to replicate, but I think they could definitely be in the 25 points per game region for sure this year. I like this defense top to bottom.
Looking at the schedule preview and the prediction, people are saying this team is overrated, which is strange because I haven't seen anything about them really other than, love for Aiden O'Connell. But this is a very sound football team. The passing attack should approach that 375 yards per game mark. I feel like the line slightly should improve at the worst. I like the front 7, and the secondary has very key returnees and plenty of experience. Hosting Penn State and Iowa could open up the door for an 8th win because they flamed Iowa last year, who never seemed to really have an offense. It's going to be hard to keep up with an offense like this, and then Penn State week 1. This is going to be a fun matchup. I think that Penn State secondary will keep Aiden O'Connell and crew in check, but that's a game they could certainly win on a Thursday night at home. 7-5 for me. I think this team could certainly hit 8 or maybe even 9 wins. Bowl game is almost a guarantee, though.
This team will definitely be in a bowl game. Last year, their bowl game against Tennessee was one of the better ones of Bowl Mania last year. Super fun game across the board. I like to see Purdue go back to a bowl game this year. I think their offense is just too talented, and their defense has enough talent to get them there. The schedule definitely is tough in some regards, but I like what they can do. I think they have a solid amount of depth on this roster to get some wins, especially late in the season, crank out wins against Illinois, Northwestern, Indiana. But I definitely wouldn't be shocked if they upset Penn State on week 1.
That Purdue game, September 17th, is very interesting because that's a game they could lose. It's a tough running attack. This defense last year, they were pretty stout against the run. I think they gave up around 150 yards per game, though. And, of course, I like the interior D-line, but Garrett Schrader, Sean Tucker at the Dome, that's a tough attack to deal with. So that should be a very fun game, one of the more underrated ones. Week 3 is not really that good, at least when I last glanced at it. So that's going to be a game that, if it's at a reasonable time, I'll certainly be circling. That's going to be it for today. As always, Nick, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That's going to be it, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.